What's going on, everybody? Chris Meaney here of FTN, and here are a few stats to know after 4 weeks of the NFL. We'll take a little peek at week 4 as well as we creep closer to week 5 of the NFL season. So I wanted to just show off our fancy air yards tool over at FTN at Fantasy and FTN at Daily.com. Again, this is a free tool, and I love checking it out. Let's look here at the top leaders for week 4, and let's look at air yards. Terry McLaurin, 217, led the way. He had 13 targets, 6 grabs, and 123 yards. He had 2 touchdowns, a massive game for McLaurin against the Falcons. Inside that same game, Calvin Ridley, not quite the same massive game, but 198 air yards, the second most for the week. No touchdowns. It's been a frustrating season for Calvin Ridley. We haven't really seen his true potential just yet, but 7 catches, 80 yards. If you can do that, that's a pretty solid floor. Tyreek Hill has that huge game where he has 3 touchdowns there, 74% of his team's air yards, 186 total, 11 grabs, and 12 targets. Courtland Sutton has been among the leaders in air yards, but he's not pulling down a lot of these catches. Of course, poor quarterback play with Drew Lock in there. 8 targets, 3 grabs, 158 air yards, but only 47 receiving yards and a 19.7 ADOT. That has something to do with him not reeling in those targets when you're getting targeted down the field nearly 20 yards down the field. Devonte Smith, a big game for the Eagle. 144 air yards, 7 grabs, 122 receiving yards. Odell Beckham Jr., 144. Man, he almost had a big 70-yard touchdown strike. Robbie Anderson, 145, or 141 rather. You know, a positive game, right? 11 targets, 5 grabs, 46 yards. It was a positive game. He's got a good matchup here against the Eagles. You know, if you were iffy about starting him, maybe you can feel a little bit better now about rolling him out, maybe as a flex. Deontay Johnson returns and, like usual, gets a ton of targets, 13 targets, 9 grabs, 141 air yards. And then Corey Davis in there at 138 and 111 receiving yards, 4 grabs, a big game against the Titans. So we'll talk about the Titans a little bit more here in just a little bit. Here's your Adot leaders for last week. Let's just round this out and say dudes with 5 targets. You got Henry Ruggs there with 22.8. Otto Beckham Jr. at 20, Courtland Sutton again, Corey Davis, Marquise Brown, Darnell Mooney, which I do believe is good for Justin Fields. I think those two are going to have a connection. Fields is now the starter the rest of the way. Terry McLaurin, Godwin was quiet, but big A-dot there. Adam Thielen, and then Calvin Ridley again. Deeper guys down the list, Josh Reynolds, Khalif Raymond. Maybe interesting plays this week in DFS. Raymond against Minnesota, and the Vikings are going to score some points against the Lions. And then Josh Reynolds, if he does play, 9 targets, 6 grabs, 59 receiving yards, 137 air yards, had the 15.22 ADOT, and 34% of his team's air yards. AJ Brown, Julio Jones not practicing again this week in a matchup against the Jags. Let's take a look at the air percentage leaders. Again, using that 5 target minimum here, we have Terry McLaurin at 74 and Hill at 74, DK Metcalf 70. But, again, poor quarterback play, and the Texans didn't really do anything, but another strong game in terms of just getting targets and air yards. Like 5 grabs, 47 yards is not a strong game, but that, I suppose, is the floor for Brendan Cooks. And, dude, it was raining in Buffalo on Sunday. Darnell Mooney in there with 51% of his team's air yards. Devontae Parker, Calvin Ridley, Stephon Diggs, Deontay Johnson, and then Leviska Chanel. He reeled in 6 of his 7 targets for 99 yards. He doesn't have a big A-dot really overall in this season. It's 6.9, but 13.57 in that game last week against the Bengals. And DJ Chark left early, and he's not going to play. Leviska Chanel was one of the most dropped players a couple weeks ago in fantasy football. How quickly things can change. This guy is an absolute must-start this week against a Titans team that it's 26th in pass DVOA. They've allowed the second most fantasy points to wide receivers at 8.4 yards per attempt, the 26th worst mark, the highest mark, and 10th most just passing yards overall at 266. So a pretty good spot this week for Leviska and for Marvin Jones. Target share leaders last week, Darnell Mooney up at the top, 41%. Okay, spike up Mooney with Fields. I do believe it's going to be a thing. Tyreek Hill, 40%. McLaurin, 39. DK, 36. Cooks again at 35. Tyler Boyd, I mean, if T. Higgins doesn't play, Tyler Boyd is lock and loaded. He's had 2 strong weeks, but I think Higgins does return this week. He has a 34% target share last week and 34% of the Bengals' air yards. Diggs, Johnson, Ridley, and Leviska in there again as well. Let's take a look at the overall leaders after 4 weeks. And let's go with target share leaders. Brandon Cooks, 37%. Adams, 35%. Kupp, 35%. DK, 31%. Deontay Johnson, when he plays, man, he just gets targeted. 31%. DJ Moore, 30%. McLaurin, Hill, and Darnell Mooney at 28%. He does only have 26 targets and 17 grabs. Air yard leaders after 4 weeks, much of the same dudes. You got Odell Beckham there at 4th with 47% of his air yards. Devonte Smith having a really strong rookie season, had the quiet game against Trayvon Diggs and the Cowboys. That's okay. A tough matchup this week against Carolina, but 23% target share and 44% of his team's air yards with a 14.35 ADOT is pretty solid. You got Chase in there, and Michael Pittman, really interesting here. 41% of his team's air yards on the season and a 26% target share, 10.67 ADOT. So not huge, but not awful either. Dude has over 60% of his team's air yards over his last 3 weeks, and I've noticed I've said the word dude a lot here. What's going on? We'll keep it rolling. Last one here to take a look at. ADOT leaders. Let's go to 12 targets. We'll get it 12 targets minimum here. You see MVS, he's on IR, but 21 ADOT. And then you got Odell Beckham Jr., 18.3. Henry Ruggs, last year he was among the leaders with whoever, all the wide receivers had at least 40 targets. He was the leader with a 17 point, I think it was 9 ADOT. And he's right around the same thing. I mean, he gets 1 or 2 shots per game. He usually catches only one of them, but 1 or 2 shots per game from Carr. Cortland Sutton, again, high ADOT. This is why he's not reeling in a lot of those air yards. 497 air yards and only 257 receptions. Starting down the field a lot. It kind of reminds me of Jerry Jeudy last season. DJ Chark sidelined, unfortunately. Emmanuel Sanders in here, Marquise Brown, Antonio Brown, and then Robbie Anderson. So there are reasons to be optimistic about Robbie Anderson with the 15 ADOT, 28% air yards, and 15% target share is not terrific, but last week was a positive game. He's got the Eagles this week, so an opportunity maybe to break out for Robbie Anderson. Take advantage of this free tool. A few stats to know. If you're looking for other statistics, we have a whole lot over at FTN Daily and FTN at fantasy.com as well. If you have any questions at all, just anything about fantasy or statistics that you'd like to see, please leave it there in the comment section in the YouTube section there, and I'll circle back and I'll address those questions. Thanks for taking the time to hang out. Smash that like button, and we'll talk to you soon. Cheers.